your problems. Today we're welcoming our special guest, an award-winning author, mother, and wife, Farsi Dumas, talking about her book, Funny in Farsi. Let me just say I read it and I loved it. A couple of stories that really stood out to me. So if you don't mind, we'll just be talking about those.
Okay.
So in your vignette, Waterloo, your father was the person in your family who taught you and your family how to swim correctly, right?
Yeah, he was. Me and my family are from Iran. Around the time I recently moved to America. Back in Iran, swimming was not a necessity, and you only learned if you taught yourself or if your father was. My father was the only one who could swim in our family, so he became our instructor and decided to teach everyone how to swim. He successfully taught the rest of my family members, including my cousins and aunts, but couldn't teach me, who only seemed to sink. He eventually gave up. Later, my aunt came to visit and tried to teach me how to swim by letting me go in the deep end. I sank again, and I almost drowned. The family decided I was a lost cause. Later, I tried swimming again, this time in the ocean, and I figured out how to swim, and now I love water.
Oh, so your father thought you were a disappointment until you were able to swim?
Well, yeah.
Great. Now, time for our special guest. Please welcome Farsi's father, Kasame Dumas. Give us some interesting information about what happened in the vignette, about your personal opinions, and why your daughter was able to swim.
It made me a little disappointed in myself because my daughter learned to swim in one of the most dangerous seas without my help. I felt jealous and a little bit prideful because she showed me how determined she was and how resilient she was to learn to swim without me. That might have been my fault, but don't think that it was such a big part of her life to name her story Waterloo. After a book was published, I researched Waterloo's significance and found out that it meant final defeat. So she was my Waterloo.
Well, that was a lot more information than I asked for. Hopefully you two have made up. Anyways, let's take a break and listen to a message from our sponsors.
The theme of this segment was, sometimes you can only achieve a goal when you are ready to.
Second bit of this interview. There's another vignette that you wrote called The Ham Amendment. Do you mind telling me more about that?
While my father was an American student, he started to have a love for ham. In Iran, ham was considered a forbidden food, and my mother hated it. This caused him to start buying ham in secret with me. Later in life, I learned about the restrictions on eating pork in Islam, and I rushed home to tell my dad about what I had learned. He then explained to me that it was a rule from the religion that was created and was because they didn't know how to cook it. He started by saying that it's not what we eat or don't eat that makes us good people, and that it's how we treat others that determines if we are good people or not.
Oh, so you didn't even know that ham was forbidden? That's crazy. Wow, that sure is fascinating. Now for another surprise, will everyone help me introduce Farsi's mother, Nazare Dumas.
Thank you for having me.
Ms. Dumas, can you give us more information to better understand the gaps and state your country, Iran, was at the time?
Well, of course. As my dear daughter explained, in her book, ham, or more generally pork, is forbidden in the religion of Islam because it was listed as a forbidden food in the Quran, which is Islam's most important religious text. Pork is considered impure because of the bacteria and toxins found in the pork due to the pigs rolling around in the mud or other things, and is believed to be one of the main reasons why Western countries have more diseases.
Wow, that certainly is interesting. Thank you so much for your time, Ms. Dumas, for coming on the show and providing all those amazing facts. Now it's time for another quick word from our sponsor.
The theme for this segment was you should not judge people by their actions, but by their character.
Welcome back to the challenge show and our final segment of the night before we say goodbye. Here we still have Farsi Dumas. Farsi, this third and final vignette in your book that I'm going to ask you is Judges Paid Off. Now, for those who have not read it yet, can you give us a quick summary?
My husband and I went on a trip to the Bahamas to relax and enjoy the nature and sights As any normal person would, when we arrive in the Bahamas, we arrive at a tourist-like location where the place is crowded and full to the brim with drunks. No one is appreciating the Bahamas, and everyone is just going to get drunk. This obviously disturbs my husband and I, and we finally get fed up and decide to walk around and see if there are any other islands that we could go to. We eventually find a location and go into a really sketchy boat named the Spanish Rose, which I totally thought was a drug boat. Anyways, we arrived at a small island with little to no tourists. In the first second we arrived, thinking that something was strange was up, we found a hotel that was the most expensive food ever due to the import of the food. We relaxed and take in the beauty of the island, which creates calmness and peace for us. During our stay, we were disturbed by some locals. The locals do a beauty pageant each year and decide to make my husband and I judges in the competition. During the pageant, everyone looked the same. No one had any distinct characteristics, and they all had the same last name, Pinder. During the competition, the famous judge next to my husband and I told us to pick the person that we thought was the most articulate. So we did. We picked a girl that looked like the underdog. She was a little overweight, and she was not as pretty as the others. She looked so glad and surprised. All of a sudden, the locals became furious and began screaming that we had been paid off. A mob started to form, and they followed us to our hotel, shouting that we were so-called judges paid off.
Oh my, that was awful. Now, for our final guest, this one will definitely be a blast from the past, or maybe not really wanted. Please welcome the mob leader from your time in the Spanish Wells, the mother of Chantel, who was one of the beauty pageant contestants. Thank you so much for flying out here.
Thank you for having me.
In Florida's Vignette, we come to know a little bit more about the island Spanish Wells. Can you please tell us some more about the small island and the conflicts with Farsi?
Sure, of course not, because I'm not a shameless liar who is greedy for money. So where I'm from, Spanish Wells, it has a settler history that dates back to the 1600s. And during the 1600s, a group of English Puritans sailed from the Bermuda in search of religious freedom. After shipwrecking on a reef called Devil's Backbone, they found refuge in a cave nearby on what is now known as Spanish Wells.
Well, I heard that 75% of the island has the last name Pinder. In fact, I heard the inbreeding is so ancient that they all look alike. Thin, spindly, with glassy blue eyes, crooked jaw, bony wrists, and thick knuckles. We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
The theme of this segment is, honesty and truthfulness are hard for one to accept due to the stubbornness and rejection that one projects onto others.
Welcome back and see you later. I had so much fun learning more about the interesting events that took in the author's Firuza's life. Now, comes to the end of our show. I do hope you enjoyed your time watching the Jellin Show at 9 p.m. Thank you and have a good night.
The impact of humor is to create comedic relief for the serious situations that Firuza has found herself in. It helps lighten the weight off her shoulders so that instead of her experience being a bad memory, it turns into a funny or comedic memory for her, which will impact the way on how she views the memories in her life.
In Judges Paid Off, the humor is found when the town gets so mad because of the chosen winner of the beauty pageant, and basically a mob forms outside of her hotel room.